Welcome back to the M2M Project, where we say fight the darkness, put truth in story. And I am here today with LA-based indie film producer Marc Clebanoff, and we're excited to talk to him today. Welcome to the show, Marc.
Thank you very much.
Great
Good to
be
here.
have you. Yeah,
well, you as well.
I'm just going to give the audience here a little bit of a background because we haven't actually met in person before. I just came across Marc while kind of going through a lot of my contacts on social media, and you kind of popped up, and I heard something you were saying on there about some of the challenges of migrating from being a writer, and I think an actor as well, if I'm not mistaken, and getting into the world of producing. And you sounds like you did a number of interesting moves, became a sales agent, and became a producer yourself. Yeah. So it just sounded like a really interesting combination of experiences that might illuminate how you've been successful as a producer. So yeah, I'll hand it over to you on that, and maybe you can tell us a little bit about your background yourself.
Acting is probably the only thing that I don't do. Otherwise, I am a jack of all trades. I'm a writer, producer, director, and as you mentioned, a global sales agent, which I'll circle back to. I started only as a writer. That's all I ever intended to be originally. Coincidentally, I ended up getting represented. My first representation was as a director, but I always made my living as a producer and a line producer because I found I was good with the logistics and the financials and the budget and whatnot. Right out of film school, I went to one of the big film schools. Right out of film school, I worked as a low-level development assistant and then a PA for a big A-list producer-director duo. And I found it interesting that, getting some insight into that studio environment early on, I was always amazed at how many amazing projects didn't move forward in that environment due to studio politics or whatever it was. But even this powerhouse producer-director duo, they had trouble moving their projects forward. And that was kind of the point in time where I realized I wanted to do things independently. I'd gone through the usual, process as an aspiring writer, sending out queries, trying to get an agent, and I just got impatient, which is how I ended up starting to produce my own content. The first project I set out to make was $1 million film. I was very fortunate to be able to attach some well-known actors to it. But even though I was getting into the right meetings with prospective and very capable investors, I wasn't able to close them because at the end of the day, I didn't really have a track record. And even though I thought I knew what I was doing, I really didn't. Yeah. So I ended up making my first feature film for about $45,000, nickel and diming, friends and family. After that, my next film I made for a little over 100. After that, I made one for about 350, and so on and so forth. But my producing partner and I, my producing partner for many years, is a very well-known actor. His name is Louis Mandylor. He's famous for the Big Fat Greek wedding movies, but he's kind of a staple in the independent action world. But anyway, Louis and I had made an array of independent features. And it was our fourth or fifth one where it was just like, we noticed this pattern where it seemed like our movies were going all over the world. Somebody was making money, but it wasn't us and it wasn't our investors. So there came a point where we realized that we wanted to take more control over our projects, and that meant getting involved in the distribution. Now, we'd been kind of flies on the wall in the sense of we were working with sales agents. We were going to the AFM, the American film market. So we got and we had colleagues in that side of the business. So we had a broad stroke sense of how distribution worked, but we didn't really understand the mechanics of it. We really didn't know what was happening under the hood. Mm-hmm. So we made the decision we were going to become our own sales agents. We figured, we're both networking machines. My partner's, recognizable guy. We figured we can't do worse than our sales agents were. Let's just go at it ourselves. Now, it took a good 5 years to really build our network, build the relationships, going to markets. I mean, I was maxing out credit cards. It was not the path of least resistance by any means. But I got an amazing education because I really learned the ins and outs of how distribution works. And ultimately, it made us much savvier producers because And you know, we'll touch on my courses and my program later, but this is kind of the through line of the whole thing is we all know what we want to do, but very few of us know what we have to do.
Yeah.
And
That
those
raises,
two things rarely align.
yeah, and that raises kind of a question in my mind, because one of the things I wanted to ask you is, because you're going through this evolutionary process, it sounds like, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you're on set a lot, where you're doing line producing, you're writing your material and gathering a lot of information. And I say this because I relate. And I've been on a lot of sets. I've talked to a lot of filmmakers who are doing things on the side, and so you feel like you're getting to really know what the business is about. And you talk to people about distribution, things like that. But it sounds like you kind of went from that track to being in the sales agent seat. And so what are, I guess it makes me wonder, what are some of the misconceptions that people, maybe like myself, who think they know a lot about the business, but they're not engaged fully? Because I've had a lot of these kind of close call deals where someone really likes the script. So you go to a boardroom, you're showing the storyboards, you're showing the script, people love it, and they're making phone calls on your behalf. But because you don't really know all of the components in terms of how they fit together, there's something you're missing. And so I'm wondering if you really saw what it is that people who are in that kind of intermediary position versus someone who knows what they're doing is missing, because you've been there, you've kind of gone through both sides of that.
Sure. Well, I think a lot of independent filmmakers are very naive in the sense, and I was early on as well, admittedly so. I think we're very naive to think if we just make a good film, it's going to find its way. It's going to get into a big film festival. It's going to go to Sundance or something of, some high level, very respectable forum like that, and it's going to get bought, and it's going to end up in theaters, and majestically it's going to make everybody a lot of money. Fact of the matter is that's a possibility, but it's not the norm. That's an anomaly. That's lightning in a bottle. And I know that everybody, not everybody, but the lion's share of independent filmmakers think that way, because I look at proposals all the time. Part of our business is a financial entity. So we cash flow and finance projects as well under very specific circumstances, but I'm very consistently looking at proposals. And when it gets to the part about the finance plan, the distribution plan, 95 out of 100 times, it's just pie in the sky, nonsense. It's going to these big film festivals, going to Sundance is not a distribution plan. Even if you get into a top tier festival, there's a very minute percentage of those films that actually do any level of business at the festival that's worthwhile of ending up in the trades. And that's assuming you can even get in. A small microcosm of the films that get submitted get in. Right. That's not a distribution plan. One of the things I often say redundantly to my followers and whatnot is producing, only 50% of producing is making good content. The other 50% of producing is knowing what to do with it. And a savvy producer doesn't make a film and then figure out what to do with it. A savvy producer who actually does it for a living, they know exactly what they're doing with that film before they ever produce it. So that's kind of the reality of it, I think. Doing your homework about understanding how distribution works. There's a lot of wheels turning within wheels. There's a lot of moving parts to distribution. I think another thing a lot of us are very naive about is theatrical distribution. I think we think if we make a strong enough film, it's just going to end up in theaters. We don't take into consideration that there's a massive investment involved in that there's a lot of different reasons to do a theatrical release. It's not just like you make a good enough film and it somehow ends up in theaters. There's a lot of myths surrounding theatrical releases. More often than not, they can tend to be a loss leader. Distribution is not a one size fits all. Some films are theatrical films, some films are not. If a movie goes in theaters, that is not a precedent of how strong the film is. There's a lot of reasons why a film goes into theaters or doesn't go into theaters. So there's a lot of myths surrounding theatrical distribution. So the bottom line is, I think most filmmakers get so focused on the creative and they don't go out of their way to educate themselves about the realities and the mechanics of the business. But the filmmakers who do learn and educate themselves about the business, they're going to have a much more firm grasp on how to produce content that is viable for the market. Ultimately, they're the ones who are going to be able to put projects together that are investable and actually have a shot at making money.